So welcome back to Sika Psychology. We had a bit of a hiatus last week to get this kind of area and the room you're currently sitting in set up. So today what we're going to talk about is what performance psychology or what sports psychology looks like in the real world. One of the biggest users of sports psychology or performance psychology in industry is the United States military. So the US Army for years have been kind of on the leading forefront of building people's resilience, doing huge randomized controlled studies, doing large intervention-based studies where they look at soldiers, they look at their families, and they look at civilian contractors who help the military and see how can we make these people more mentally resilient as well as just perform higher, have better efficiency values, and overall this notion of mental well-being or holistic well-being, how can they start to improve that in people who have very, very high levels of stress. The name of this program, or the name that's kind of formed around this program, is the Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program. So it focuses on those three stakeholders, so the soldiers themselves, the soldiers' families or their support circles, and the civilian contractors who work with the military, and it looks at improving 5 pillars: physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and family. Basically what they're looking to do is, through a system of modules and continued professional development, is kind of improve all of these values so that notion of a rising tide raises all boats. They're trying to improve all aspects of a soldier's life. They're also trying to improve all aspects of kind of psychological coping mechanisms that a soldier and their family may have to just make sure they're better at their job. This system has been described as a structured, long-term assessment and intervention-based program that will help soldiers to be more resilient. There's 4 steps in the program itself. The first step is a global assessment tool. So they call it the GAT. It's basically a 15-minute test. It's like tick box answers. What you have is a range of questions made up from peer-reviewed psychological test batteries. So you'll have things coming from the tops, you'll have things coming from a broad range of kind of very, very well-defined psychological prerequisites tests. You'll have things coming also from questionnaires such as the POMS, like profile of mood states. The next aspect then, after your assessment tool has been done and completed, is you have, like they call them, comprehensive modules. So basically what it is those 5 pillars we talked about earlier. There's around 20 modules in each of those 5 pillars. And soldiers, as they go through, or families as they go through, can complete the modules. It's an online based system. So they complete the modules and they gradually kind of upskill as they complete each one. The third aspect then is something they call master resilience trainers. So basically what these people are, or individuals are, is they're soldiers who have gone through all of their kind of comprehensive resilience modules. They've ticked off a certain amount of CPD, and these are then open for the general community within the military to use as a kind of sounding board, to use as helpers when they're going through their own modules, but they're also there as a role model. So these would be people that would be seen within the military to be very resilient. They'd be seen as kind of ideal cases or ideal scenarios, and they're used as this kind of flagship model for psychological strength. The final aspect then is the kind of ideal person within this whole system. So it's called institutional master resilience training. These are basically the people who will go away and train those people in the previous tier. So you have 3 tiers within this training system. So you can be either competent, you can be a facilitator, or you can be an actual trainer yourself. And this is the top level. So you would typically see kind of higher ranks within the military going on to achieve this. People who might be in charge of leading or facilitating resilience training in other groups. It's a kind of moving away and going away and doing this course. So it's not a remote based setting. It's not an online setting. They're actually doing proper psychological training in person in some institution. Right, so what could be considered wrong with this system, or where might the shortcomings come, right? So within the first two areas we spoke at, so the GAT, like the general assessment tool, what you see is that's not mandatory for family members of the military and for civilian contractors. So one of the key kind of cornerstones of this system is that it's not just the soldier themselves, it also provides their support circle with the necessary training. But if we don't have the assessment tool mandatory for kind of like your inner circle, it's oftentimes just going to be negated. And even if a soldier's parents go away and do some of the modules, if they're not provided with the assessment or they're not being shown what the assessment meant for them, they mightn't be doing the necessary modules. Second thing then is that the modules themselves aren't mandatory. So when a soldier's going through their training, they're kind of pushed towards this, or it's highly recommended for them. But those modules, as far as I'm aware, aren't fully compulsory to complete, or there's not a certain amount you should complete each year. The last kind of shortcoming of this system that I have found or that I've heard of is just the fact that some of the training doesn't really take place in a military environment. So a lot of time it's taking place in a separate institution. Oftentimes those trainers, because they're doing a certain amount of CPD, aren't really in the military as much as kind of ordinary soldiers would be. So they might be deemed to be slightly removed from some of the action or from some of those stress factors. Right, so does this system work? Is this a system that you could apply to your organization, to your team, to you as an individual to become more resilient and just have better psychological skills or coping mechanisms? Yes, this system works incredibly well. So one of the huge advantages of this being within the military, and particularly within the US military, is that you have large sample sizes and they're very, very well conducted studies. So in randomized control trials of over 9,000 participants, you see significant improvements in areas such as emotional control, resilience, a number of other things. So in that particular randomized control trial, I think they had over 20 variables that they look at as being positive for psychological coping mechanisms, and they had significant improvements in all of them over the course of this training cycle. So how could you apply this for yourself? Well, this is being applied all over the world in a vast array of settings. So you have this all the way from professional rugby clubs and international teams, all the way through to organizations, particularly to some of like the Silicon Valley tech organizations, so large company structures where they're looking for large amounts of autonomy within their team, but also very, very strong and resilient employees. How can you go about finding more of this information? Well, a lot of this is published online, which is very, very useful. You can go and find some of the general assessment tool questions. You can even run something that's very, very similar to the general assessment tool yourself. If it's something you're going to do, go and do it as kind of a novelty exercise. Look if there's areas where you might be deficient. Don't look too much into results, but it can be a very, very interesting exercise for you to do yourself. So thanks very much for watching. As always, if you could comment below with some of your opinions. If you've been in the military and you've done some of this assessment, I would really, really like to hear how you got on with it or how you found the modules to be. Or if your organization or where you work does things similar to this, so maybe psychological prerequisites for employees, I'd be very interested to hear your opinions down below. Thanks, guys.